Welcome to We Might Be Nerds, a podcast about everything from entertainment and technology to science and history. I'm your host, Dylan Critchfield, and unfortunately we weren't able to have the scheduled discussion on the value of video games this week due to a number of factors. Sometimes stuff doesn't work out. Unfortunately, Kyle isn't able to join us this week as a part of that. So, joining me this week is my wonderful wife, Sarah Critchfield, and we're going to give you some Halloween facts. It's that time of year, right?
Yeah.
Close enough. It's about 2 weeks out at this point. As of the date of recording, it is exactly 13 days out.
Although some people say that Halloween started September 1st, especially when Animal Crossing put out their update.
That is true, but in any case, we thought we'd talk about some of the roots of certain traditions of Halloween and just give you some fun facts. This is going to be a shorter episode. We are going to be putting out another episode within the next few weeks to sort of supplement this that will be a little bit more full of content. So we may give this an episode number, we may not. We'll see where it goes. So let's start with the tradition of trick-or-treating. In North America, at least, you get up, you get a mask, you get a costume. If you're within, say, less than the age of driving a car, generally. Go door to door, say trick-or-treat. Usually, say trick-or-treat, get candy is the extent of the transaction. But apparently that's not always the case, even in modern times. And the act of trick-or-treating has its root in souling. Souling is an old Christian tradition that has its root in the 16th century, mostly in England. Folks would go from door to door, not in the sense that we think of today, not to homes, but to farms and local parishes to ask for food and ale and a substance called soul cake on All Saints' Day, on November 1st. And the promise of the exchange was, hey, give us some food. They would do a performance or an act of some variety in exchange for food, along with the promise that the folks receiving the food would pray for the souls of those who had passed on. Later on, that formed the roots of a Irish tradition. I think it actually started in Ireland, called guising, where kids would get in disguise, put on a mask, and go door to door, performing or doing some sort of performative act to receive a treat. Picture a kid doing a cartwheel and they get the treat. Some kids would do, if they were good enough, they would do card tricks, sleight of hand tricks, or even play an instrument a little bit. If this were still the case today, I don't think I ever would have gone trick-or-treating.
Actually, where I grew up, this was pretty normal. Grew up on the other side of the river from here.
Which is St. Louis.
Yes, St. Louis. And it could be just growing up on the hill, and that was normal there. But my dad always made sure that I had a long list of probably not kid-appropriate jokes that I would have to recite and perform when going trick-or-treating. You say trick-or-treat, and sometimes they'd answer the door and say, okay, what you got? And if it wasn't very good, they'd ask for another one. And you sometimes had to have quite a few. Some people were real sticklers with their candy, and you had to earn it.
I had never heard of this until today, and we discussed this a little bit earlier as I was researching this, but there are apparently a couple of other places in the U.S. where you still have to do the trick to get the treat.
More like trick for treat.
And just to go back to the Hill for a moment, the Hill is a part of St. Louis that is largely Italian in its cultural roots, but it seems like it might be a bit heavy on Irish as well.
And that could have just been my family personally.
But I was able to find a Wall Street Journal article looking from Wikipedia about a 5 and 7-year-old boy practicing their jokes in preparation for trick-or-treating as recently as 2014. So that may still be the case today. Again, we're about 30 minutes from St. Louis, but I grew up in this area and I had never heard of that until literally today. So going on back to guising for a moment, This practice continued and made its way to America as what we traditionally know as trick-or-treat in the 1920s. And some folks took issue with that. It wasn't uncommon in the 20s and 30s for kids to actually have to explain what trick-or-treating is to adults. And I don't know about you, but like if I had hit a home where they didn't know what trick-or-treat was, I would have ran. Because what kid wants to do that?
So these parents or adults think they're being pranked by these kids and extorted for candy?
That was very much the perspective a lot of folks had on it, is trick or treat is a threat. If I don't give you a treat, you're going to do something to trick me. They saw it as a thinly veiled, light extortion, or in some cases begging. Even other kids had that perspective. Even up till 1940s, there are reported incidents of groups of boys carrying banners saying, "We don't beg in America." Nonetheless, in the 1950s, it really did catch on and take hold and grew into the tradition that we know today. Up to 80% of families prepare to give out candy on Halloween for trick-or-treat. And up to somewhere near 90 or more % of kids of the appropriate age plan on going trick-or-treating. Now, let's talk about age for a minute. Generally, the accepted rule is if you're old enough to drive a car, you're too old for trick-or-treating, yeah?
That seems to be the generally accepted age. However, personally, if a teenager was there with a bunch of their friends and they were harmlessly going door to door asking for some candy and they were in good humor, I'd give them some candy, wouldn't you?
I would, and where we live, there's no hard age restriction. Generally, if you're an adult, you're just going with kids, you don't get the candy. And in some municipalities, there
Not
is
until
a hard...
after.
Yeah, no, you don't get the candy.
You get the candy tax later, which is about 30%, I think, is a generally accepted number.
It depends on
on the parent.
And how much they can get from their kids without them noticing. But that's... I'm not going to encourage that. That said, there are some municipalities that, again, put a hard limit on the age for trick-or-treating, generally around 12 or 13. As those kids are expected to, go to a Halloween dance or some other,
like a
function.
Party with their friends.
Yeah, stuff like that. Talking about other traditions, bobbing for apples has its root in Ireland and Britain in the 17th to 20th centuries, where, you have apples in a tub filled with water and you have to dunk for it. Apparently that's been going on for a long time and was generally just an activity associated with the season that All Saints' Day, Halloween, and All Souls' Days fall within.
Did it just have to do with the surplus of apples being harvest season? Why not bobbing for something else?
They involve apples because, in Celtic mythology, apples were strongly associated with the other world and immortality, actually.
Much like the Norse mythology, you had Idun, the goddess of youth, who guarded the golden apples that kept the gods youthful and immortal.
And speaking of religious context for Halloween, there was a book published in the 70s by a Eddie J. Smith called Halloween, Hallowed is That Name, that seeks to offer some religious justification for Halloween. In modern times, you will often see church groups of varying faiths dissuade people from going trick-or-treating or getting involved in costuming. But what Mr. Smith proposes is that by dressing up as these things that are viewed as supposed to be terrifying to mortals, by wearing these costumes, you're basically laughing at Satan for being a failure and being powerless in the world of man. Or saying, or just rather straight up saying, we're not afraid of you, which is, frankly, a pretty bold move to just give the middle finger. But hey, there you go. So, contrary to what a lot of folks will tell you, there does seem to be some folks who see holy value in the act of getting dressed up as a gross, scary thing on Halloween, which was something I had not heard of until today, and that's probably a book I'll want to read through just to hear a little bit more of that perspective. I think it's fairly interesting. But enough of costumes and the like. Let's talk about some of the other aspects of Halloween. We have you have your haunted mazes and your haunted hayrides and your Halloween decorations. One of which is jack-o'-lanterns. But before we get into kind of where jack-o'-lanterns come from, what kind of things besides, the blow-up floats and jack-o'-lanterns and, like, cobwebs and stuff have you seen in houses, like, growing up?
It depends how serious the people are about Halloween. There have been some pretty benign decorations, and then some pretty terrifying ones that look like you just strolled into a murder scene.
Yikes.
And again, growing up in St. Louis, you saw the whole spectrum.
From what I've seen, the people who go hard for Halloween are also the same ones who do the bonkers, intricate Christmas lights. They're just festive people. But on the scary sides of things, like beyond just stuff being gory, did you ever see anybody try to do jump scares to kids who were coming up and trick-or-treating?
I have not personally. I don't do scary. I have heard stories that you had some interesting jump scare opportunities growing up.
Yeah, okay, I'll talk about this one. So, I've seen it, and you may have seen it. When trick-or-treating as a child, you go to someone's house, you get the candy, and someone jumps out from behind somewhere or triggers, a voice-chipped, flashing jack-o'-lantern or something to get a jump on some kids. When I was young, my dad set up a pulley system we had a very large tree in the front yard, and set us up with a pulley system that he acted as the counterweight. It was dark enough that he could go around the side of the house while holding the rope, and we would be standing in a tree, and when trick-or-treaters come up, we would jump and literally just scream at people coming down from literally 15-ish feet up and just scaring the daylights out of people. I do remember there was one gal who straight up just ran screaming her head off across the street. And in hindsight, that's actually really dangerous because she totally could have gotten hit by a car.
Yeah. If you're gonna scare responsibly, please. I know I would have wet myself. I don't do jump scares. And that would have terrified me, and if you had done that to me as a kid, I don't think you and I would be married now.
Fair enough. Of course, everyone has their various comfort levels with Halloween. Jump scares and the like, I'm fine with. Some folks want to go for deeper existential dread, and if that's your thing, fine. But I think most folks for Halloween just go with stuff that generally makes folks uncomfortable. That's why I've seen in haunted houses, grapes painted as eyeballs and stuff like that.
Peeled grapes. And the spaghetti and the Jell-O, the stuff the Rugrats did. Yeah.
It got me thinking recently of, we have much more sophisticated techniques available to us today thanks to modern technology and products that people can make as a result of said technologies being made available in the home. You have stuff like Arduinos that you can, program a microcontroller to control some actuated motors. You have easily accessible, small computers that you could hook up to a speaker and whatnot. So I want to run this past you, and you, the listener, if you've got the skills, if you ever make this or have seen someone make this, please let me know and send us an email. We might be nerdspod@gmail.com because I would love to see this. So, you see skeletons out on porches or scarecrows holding the bowl of candy. I really want to either build next year or see someone build a scarecrow that holds the bowl of candy or skeleton that is rigged with electronic motors or pneumatics controlled by an Arduino, either remotely or on a motion sensor, where someone reaches their hand to grab the bowl and the arm actually lifts and moves towards the hand grabbing at it, and maybe plays a pre-recorded message of, "Hey, what are you doing with my candy?" Just to see the result that would give. Because that seems much more benign on one hand. On the other hand, it might really scare the crap out of some people.
So maybe have it say, "You didn't say please."
That is actually perfect. Again, if you've seen anything like this, please send it my way because, living in the COVID times, I think we could all use a little bit more levity in our lives, and I find that kind of stuff very funny. Anyway, off that topic, let's talk a little bit about jack-o'-lanterns and where they come from.
Usually you plant seeds, and you give it some TLC all season, and then you get some lovely squash, which are actually fruit. And then you harvest said fruit, and then you do things with them. What do you do with them?
Well, you carve them and you put a candle in them, but again, it wasn't always pumpkins.
Correct. It used to be something much creepier.
Yeah, usually turnips or another kind of root vegetable that was hollowed out to make a lantern and have, grotesque or spooky faces carved in them. And this is rooted in Halloween time in Ireland in the 19th century.
Sounds like Ireland knew how to party.
It really did. In these Gaelic-speaking regions, Halloween was was also the festival of Samhain, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
You're not.
But to the people who made them, the lanterns were said to represent spirits or supernatural beings, or they were put out into windowsills to ward off evil spirits from entering the home.
Seems legit.
Seems legit, but when at some point...
So that's like the spirits come to the house and they see something already creepy there and they're like, "Oh hey, no vacancy. Let's go to the next one."
Yeah, hey, this house is already haunted. We can move on. Let's go.
Yeah, our work here's done.
But at some point, I guess pumpkins were just larger and easier to carve out.
Probably.
Is what it comes down to.
I think it would have a lot to do with how long of a shelf life they had. Because turnips would spoil very quickly.
True.
And the harder exterior of a pumpkin would give it a little more shelf life. Not if you have a bunch of squirrels, but usually they would last longer than a turnip.
Yeah, and hey folks, squirrels like them some pumpkin.
Don't bleach your pumpkins. You kill all your squirrels.
Or do if you hate squirrels. I'm not condoning that.
Don't listen to him.
Yeah, don't.
Because it's not just squirrels. Your wildlife eats your pumpkins.
So moving on from the decorations and the traditions, let's get... The last Halloween fact I want to give is in regards to the film Hocus Pocus, which, at least here in the U.S., is a very popular film to watch around Halloween. You have your other stuff. Coco is obviously a modern Halloween favorite, more recent. In our home, I've always watched The Nightmare Before Christmas, both on Halloween and Christmas, because it's a both holidays movie to me.
And it's very musical and entertaining.
It's very catchy, and it will get stuck in your head. But Hocus Pocus tends to be the film folks gravitate to. And as it turns out, Hocus Pocus was critically panned on release. Just, critics didn't like it. It was a commercial...
Flop?
A commercial flop, yeah. And part of that had to do with the fact that this is a Halloween movie released in July. Why?
It's like they got their timing off a little bit.
A little bit. But also, in the 90s, you had kids' films and you had adult films. You didn't have all audience-focused films where you had stuff targeted at adults and kids. That wasn't really something you did in movies like we're used to today. So the adult humor being present was one of the reasons it was panned. Having if you're an adult, you can tell that boy is trying to get with the main girl, whose name escapes me at the moment, frankly. But, I mean, straight up, a kid gets killed in the first 5 minutes. You see her soul get sucked out of her. Another one gets damned to being a cat for 100-something years.
That's messed up.
But because the movie was repeatedly played on Disney-owned or affiliated channels like ABC, folks saw it enough that it gained the popularity it has today. So there's just one more Halloween fact for you. But anyway, thank you for joining us on this, frankly, short episode of We Might Be Nerds. Again, we're going to have another episode out, hopefully within the next couple weeks, or it might just be our next regularly scheduled release. Again, we're sorry we weren't able to do the discussions we said we were going to do. We are going to get to both the topics of the value of video games and the history of YouTube within the month of November, December. But for now, again, thank you for joining us in our little Halloween factisode. As always, you can find us on social media on Twitter at We Might Be Nerdspod, or if you want to shoot us an email, we might be nerdspod@gmail.com is where you can send us a message. I'm your host, Dylan Critchfield. Sarah, thank you so much for sitting with me and talking about some Halloween facts.
No problem.
Again, the next episode is going to be in 2 weeks on November 2nd, I believe. Yes, November 2nd will be the next episode. And though that would have normally been our episode on the history of YouTube, we actually will be having a special guest on our next episode. So keep an eye out for that coming on November 2nd. I don't want to make any more promises that we can't fully commit to given the situation this week. But again, thank you for joining us on We Might Be Nerds.
And enjoy your Halloween safely and responsibly.
Respect social distancing. And if you're not with your costume, wear a mask. We'll see you next time.